In this day of cancel culture, where good people run the risk of being smeared and slandered as bigoted and phobic for speaking facts and truth about the dangers of certain lifestyles and movements that are targeting our kids to groom them and suck them into cult-like deceptions, and where clearly and unapologetically speaking the truth can get you banned and deplatformed, removed from the air, or fired, or even sued, it's rare to find people who've been willing to remain solid and uncompromising over the years, who've remained willing to bring trustworthy and reliable information to us about matters related to key cultural and moral issues within our country and abroad. So when you find such a person, someone who's remained consistent over the years, a person who's demonstrated keen insight into the things that impact the culture and the family, that's someone we need to highlight, to bring to the attention of people. Well, I'm happy to say we've just such a person to highlight.
The following program is sponsored by Mission America and may contain views and opinions that do not reflect the views of the advertisers, staff, and owners of this station. Some material may not be suitable for children. Listener discretion is advised.
Yep, I used to be a liberal too.
This is Mission America with Linda Harvey.
Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to Mission America Radio. I'm Linda Harvey, and I'm so very glad you've joined us this afternoon. Please visit our website at missionamerica.com for more information about our organization and to read news, articles, and Christian commentary on the culture.
Well, join us as we'll have an opportunity to hear from speaker and author Linda Harvey, who's also the voice behind the national daily broadcast of Mission America. We'll hear her personal story, why she decided to launch Mission America, what influences have formed her worldview, and what's it been like coming from a family on the opposite side of the political spectrum. We'll hear how, as an early feminist working within Planned Parenthood, she had her eyes open to the importance of the issue of the sanctity of life, how it's the key issue in sustaining a free and civilized country, and what inevitably happens within a society as it shifts toward devaluing life. And that culture then inevitably moves toward becoming an authoritarian-controlled society where freedoms evaporate, especially the freedom of speech. She'll share her concerns over the efforts by anti-family and pro-choice radicals to impact the family, primarily by changing the sexual mores of the culture and by targeting kids' minds and morals. Lastly, she'll discuss how those influences are being used in schools to groom kids, to create sexual confusion in the minds of kids, making them susceptible to mental manipulation and willing to drink the Kool-Aid of the pushers of the trans deception by embracing the myth of gender fluidity and becoming easy targets for predators who would prey upon them. We'll hear from Linda Harvey next on the Predator Watch podcast.
Predator Watch provides a brief overview of important stories in the news or issues of concern as they relate to understanding the nature of sexual predators, their characteristics, how their minds operate, their methods of manipulation, and what motivates them. They hide in plain sight, can smell an opportunity a mile away, and count on people not understanding just how dark their hearts are and how intent they are about always producing victims. Stay tuned as John Euler, a licensed professional counselor with over 25 years of professional experience treating both survivors and sexual predators, shares his insights on this edition of Predator Watch.
I am John Euler, and welcome to Predator Watch podcast. It's a real privilege for me to have on the program Linda Harvey. Her media ministry is an outgrowth of her Christian faith and a successful career in marketing and public relations. And she's a former advertising executive. She managed multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns, primarily in the healthcare field, and she was formerly director of marketing communications at Ohio State University Hospitals. In 1995, she founded Mission America, a Christian pro-family organization tracking current cultural issues. Her flagship website, missionamerica.com, has articles on current social issues. She produces a weekly e-newsletter that's sent out to a national audience and has an Ohio-wide radio show on the Salem Network in Columbus, Ohio, on 880 AM WRFD. She's a regular contributor to conservative news sites and is frequently interviewed by both secular and Christian news outlets. And she's a frequent columnist for the news site WorldNet Daily, WND.com, and the author of 2 Christian books, Maybe He's Not Gay, Another View on Homosexuality, and the other is Not My Child, Contemporary Paganism and the New Spirituality. In addition to all that, she speaks at conferences, and she was a media representative at the United Nations Conference. She's spoken to Tea Party groups and has testified on social issues before legislative committees, both nationally and in Ohio, with the Ohio Pro-Family Forum. Linda holds a BA in English from Miami University, Oxford, Ohio, and has done graduate work at Miami, Ohio State University, and Trinity Lutheran Seminary. And she's a wife, mother, and grandmother, and lives in the Columbus, Ohio area. Linda, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, John. Your bio is way longer than that, so it's an honor to be with you.
Well, it's long overdue on my part, so I'm very, very appreciative of the opportunity to have you on. You have been doing a yeoman's work for so many years and on your site. As a matter of fact, again, your website is missionamerica.com.
Yes.
And you have a radio broadcast that you were kind enough to have me on a couple of times. Tell the viewers about that.
It's thewordcolumbus.com. You can go there. It's a Salem network station, WRFD here in Columbus, 880 AM. So it's live streaming. There's also an FM. So the FM is the Columbus area. The AM goes all over Ohio. So I'm on 1 to 1:30 on Saturdays, and I have a 4-minute commentary Monday through Friday at 10:20 AM.
How did you decide to launch Mission America? And tell us the story.
Well, it's a long story. I'll try to shorten it. But in my adulthood, early adulthood, I was a social liberal and grew up in a home where we went to the Episcopal Church, which, as you and most of your viewers will probably know, was even then leaning toward being progressive, but certainly didn't do much in the way of discipling people in biblical values and in actually taking the Bible as a credible source. It was a mainline denomination. And before that, I had been to a Baptist church with my grandmother a few times when I visited her. But I went away from all that in my early adulthood, and even at one point was a volunteer for Planned Parenthood, if you can, I know. So it was a short time. I was a person who oriented new clients, and many of them were 14 and 15 years old, which just breaks my heart when I think back on that. But I was in my 20s, oriented new clients to contraceptive methods. And later on, I looked back on that when I had children, and I thought, what was I thinking? But I had come up through the revolution, sexual revolution in the 60s, and was influenced by all of that. My parents were Democrats, and nobody was too wild left wing and out there, but we were, solid Democrats. And once I got into college, I went away from a faith, any kind of a faith base. And it took having children and a number of other issues going on in my life and attending a Lutheran seminary for me to make the decision. Before I went to the seminary for a master's degree, I had already made the decision that I was a believer in Jesus Christ, and I believed the Bible. And that was a big change, a huge worldview change. And then I made the decision to go to the seminary. And that was the final, the final linchpin in opening my eyes to where America was going. First of all, if you change the Christian church, and they were big time changing from homosexuality to feminism to basically discarding the Bible completely. Once you've changed that, you've changed America. And that was where I decided, my background is in advertising and PR. I have to do something here. And so that's when we launched Mission America.
Well, your story is exciting to me in this sense that you've come by this honestly, right? You have seen the other side. You lived it in a way, but you understand how the other side thinks, and not that you started out conservative or have always been conservative and then studied to try to figure out how the other worldview thinks, so to speak, or sees the world, but you were there. And so that makes it deeply rooted.
I've thought about that before, and I would never denigrate anyone who was blessed enough to be brought up in a Christian home, a believing home. And because if you don't do that in your early adulthood, you go down some roads that you later wish you had not, or take up some ideas and some ideology that you wish you had not. So I would never denigrate anyone, because those folks end up with such a solid foundation, family that backs you all the time in what you do, and many other firm foundations. But I do see what you're saying, in that, having been there, I know exactly how these people think.
Honored to be here speaking to you right now. I had the privilege of always knowing I could access abortion care. Just knowing I would never be forced to carry a child I did not want. Knowledge that men carry 24/7 left me free to dream, free to pursue, free to become the woman I am standing here today.
And I know that progressive ideas do not work. Ultimately, you are unhappy and you don't even know why. Because what happens is I was at that point where I had discarded even considering Christian conservatism. And it took my heart to change over a period of time, and for me to think, oh boy, wait a minute, I think I believe this stuff. And then going, wait, no, it's too threatening. I can't go there. And coming back again and saying, I think I do believe this. And then your heart changes, and then your worldview changes, and you go down that road. And you're like, wait, now I get it. Now I'm looking at information that before I would never have considered. And so as I say to people, I was on an interview with a young lady the other day from a journalism school, and we'll see how that turns out. Sometimes they're very nice, and then they edit it heavily and get the other side, and you get distorted. But I trusted. I thought, I'll trust this and see where it goes. But I told her, that the issue is that you're in that lifestyle, and or in that ideology of being a liberal. Then you change to conservatism. And she said to me, so is everything you do now based on your Christian faith? Is that how you present abstinence-based sex education and opposition to the LGBTQ agenda and opposition to abortion? And I said, no, the difference is now I can argue it from the secular standpoint, and lots of other people can too. I'm not alone in this. I'm sure you could as well. But I could argue it from a religious standpoint. I can argue it from a Judeo-Christian influence, Western civilization standpoint, or from a totally public health, social science, and secular standpoint, because now I have opened my eyes enough to look at other pieces of information that before I never considered. And the dots are all connected. And so you see, yes, this is why progressive values don't work. They limit their knowledge. They limit what they will consider. They're very, very rigid. And I was in that camp. Very rigid. It's like, oh no, we can't go there. We can't go there. You see that happening in our culture right now, where the media has certain things they absolutely will not report on. And you know that the top editors have said, no, we aren't going to go there, whether it's a presidential candidate and accomplishments by that president, or whether it's the hundreds of thousands of people who descend on the March for Life in Washington in January, and it gets buried on page 12, but 10,000 people show up for a far left women's march, and it's front page news for weeks. I mean, that kind of stuff. There's just certain things they won't go toward, and it is up to us then, and that's just why Mission America and why you're doing what you do, to have an alternative, to present the alternative media to these folks and an alternative viewpoint.
But it's interesting that your story speaks of the fact that ultimately this is not a matter of the head. It's a matter of the heart. And only the Lord can change someone's heart.
Right. Exactly. There are so many people in my family, for instance, my extended family, who do not agree with what I do. They love me and I love them, but they are firmly in the other camp. And I love these people. I know they're good. They are trying to be good people, and they think they're doing the right thing. But we can't have a conversation because it starts being peppered with, snippets of pot shots, things they've learned from the other side, because they will not let themselves go there. It's like everybody's chosen their camp, or the progressives have certainly chosen a camp, and the camp they've chosen is bounded by walls. These people are in the prison of those ideas, and they will not let themselves go outside that, because to do so means that some person that they admire won't admire them back. They're in a prison of the fear of what other people think of them. Yeah, that's really what it boils down to, and it's really, really sad. But my prayer is that the hearts of these folks would change, and my prayer is for the people that I write about who are my ideological opponents, and I'm sure you're the same way, that their hearts would change. I mean, I will, in a very determined way, express all of my outrage about the corruption of children, the sexual corruption of children, the slaughter of unborn children through abortion. And yet I know many, many post-abortive people, women and men, and, many of them have repented, and God is always there to offer repentance. I know many ex-homosexuals. I know many ex-transgenders, and God is there for anyone who wants to change. And so I try to, offer that alternative as much as I can, even while I'm very stern about what I believe and what needs to happen in this country, and especially the protection of children. This is the part that our culture has forgotten, and you're on top of that all over the place. But it's not all about people over age 18 deciding, whether we interfere with someone's sex life or not. It is about the formation of new characters and children who are developmentally different when you sexualize them early. And developmentally different can have, of course, traumatic implications for the person, but traumatic implications for becoming a barbaric culture. And that's what we're seeing.
There's this, I want to say almost a schizophrenic, but it's not. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. But you have radical feminists, you have women that are trying to fight men from coming into their private spaces, yet they are so staunchly in favor of abortion, they cannot see that that issue has blinded them to everything that has paved the way for men in drag.
Yes. Within
the alternative lifestyles. It's the ultimate Trojan horse.
Right. I could talk about this all day, so I'll just dive in here. Yes, back when I was pro-choice, and I always thought of myself as pro-choice and not pro-abortion, I was having sex before marriage. I lived openly with my ex-husband before we got married, and I've been remarried for 30 years to my wonderful husband now. But my My ex-husband was also a liberal lawyer, and he's still a lawyer actually, but we just thought nothing of this, and I thought I managed all that very well, just like I was taught in my volunteer time at Planned Parenthood, the contraceptives and all that. And it's a public health and a social science sort of a platform statement now that you really can't recommend better and worse sexual behavior. That has been going on for about 40 years. Nothing else behaves like that. We don't do on social health and social science and public health. We don't deal with that on smoking. We don't deal with that on seatbelts. We don't deal with that on driving. We don't deal with that on drinking. Nothing else. But sexual behavior, you're just supposed to do what you want and then manage it the best way you can. Condoms, various kinds of other latex, pills, shots. And then if all else fails, abortion. And this was easy to predict that we would get from the early, safe but rare abortion where you can't really see that it's a baby to the end point where we're carving up fully viable children out of someone's womb. And now even allowing post-birth abortion, which is infanticide. It was easy to predict. Many conservatives predicted this. I was along with all the social liberals saying, oh no, we'll never get to that point. We would never be that barbaric. We are that barbaric.
And until someone's willing to see it, and therefore the issue of the heart, until someone is willing to see the slippery slope effect and how far down we are, I either see it or I don't, but people need to see that the devaluing and objectifying of life has so many ramifications.
Yes, that's what's happening. And you can see that in the extremely vicious but well-permitted vilification of conservatives, of Donald Trump, of Republicans. It goes on and on and on, of Christians, the rejection of even religious liberty. The progressives, the Democratic Party is just going to toss all that away. And this is now a party platform that it's called discrimination. If you object to abortion, if you object to homosexuality and gender confusion, and that's a part of your religious faith, then you have no right to that any longer. And it goes on from there. There is the elitist idea that the people with the education, the people who are well informed and enlightened on all this, we can decide. We can decide how this all goes. Yes, we can decide even what people live and what people die. That's where it ultimately goes. And until you face that in your own heart, that's where you're going with all of this, and the contempt that people have for Christians and conservatives and conservative values, until you face that, you have not faced down where this is heading and that Nazi element that's there. And it really is there. And so when they call us Nazis, they don't, and that's, you've heard that before. The shoe is quite much on the other foot. That's where people go when you don't value life, and pleasure and convenience and entitlement are the bywords. And that's what life is all about. And that is not what life is all about. That's never what God intended. Life has to have a preeminent value. And that is where Christianity shines above every other faith, every other ideology out there, is that there's always hope. A person can be changed by the Lord no matter what they've done. St. Paul was a murderer, and the Lord appeared to him and changed him and used him in a magnificent way. There's so many examples like that. So life is number one, and life in the womb, cradle to grave, is valuable.
Linda, for years you've been addressing cultural issues almost as I want to say John the Baptist, a clarion call, a voice crying in the wilderness. But Dobson has been out there. A number of folks have been out there. But you've been doing teaching as far as videos. Somebody can go on your site. There's a video from 2009, so almost 10 years ago, called The Emerging Lie. And You prognosticated where we're at. Describe for the viewer what that video is all about, why you decided to make that particular video as far as teaching, and then how did you know, how could you tell, and then what keeps you up at night? Because where do you see us going?
Well, one of the things that I'll just talk a little bit bigger than that video because it's throughout some of my material, but the thing that drew me into the trying to become part of the voice out there, the pro-family movement, if you will, and the pro-life movement, is the heart I have for children, in that if you change how children are raised and what assumptions they have as they're being raised, you change them and you change families and then you change America. And you can change it in a generation into total barbarism. And that's what I'm very afraid where we're at. Trying to get children into a sexual mindset is the way you do it, the quickest and easiest way to do it. And with all the media, the internet, social media, it's exponentially easier for predators. And predators can be not physical, but they can be mental and spiritual and emotional predators. Sexual predators can bypass parents, bypass churches, go right directly to children, and you've got people in the streets, like we see the Antifa people. I think if you were to look at the backgrounds, and I'm generalizing broadly, I know, but at the backgrounds of a lot of these folks involved in the radical looting and burning, the chaos, the anti-police, defund the police, all of that, no matter what color they are, you're going to find people that are sexually without many boundaries. And probably there's a molestation, and probably there has been sexualization and porn use all in there, because this tends to unleash violent tendencies in people very quickly. There's almost no better way to create chaos in a culture than that. And so that was my one of my huge concerns, was not simply the people involved. And that's why I called this ministry Mission America. It's what is going on with our country and how it's being shaped by the social liberal agenda and how it's changing people. And it's drawing them, of course, further and further away from even being a little bit receptive to the salvation by Jesus Christ. They just reject all of that because they want their sexual, their pornographic, and their other fleshly indulgences, which we have tutored them so, unfortunately, so well to believe they are entitled to. It's a sexual entitlement mentality, and it starts early. And the other aspect of that is that where the LGBTQ agenda comes in here is when you start with children late elementary school and in middle school, having them question their sexuality, and then you give them virtually no information about the standard traditional morality that, no, you're never born that way, and yes, lots of people have left that. You undermine all that, and then you tell them, if you have any of those feelings, you're probably born that way, you better just embrace it. And then, of course, there's no problem, however, sex ed will teach them there's no problem for them to experiment in those ways. What's the downside? Well, when you think about that situation, there is no lower age limit to which you can sexualize children. Pregnancy is not a risk. Peer-to-peer sexuality is not much of a risk, or so they say, because initially it's peer-to-peer. Those kids won't have sexually transmitted diseases. Now, when those students then start being approached by the older predators, that's where the disease introduction comes. But when pregnancy is off the table, why not? That's where we're going. And that's the thing that I read Genesis 19, and it opened my eyes to the fact that the people pounding at Lot's door were young and old from every quarter. They were not simply homosexuals. They were also bisexuals, because Lot, in one of the worst parenting moves of all time, offered them his daughters. So they were omnisexual, young and old. They were rich and poor. I mean, and they were predatory gangs. This is where we're going. And Sodom and Gomorrah, we learn elsewhere in Scripture, were affluent. They were full of food. They were materialistic. They cared little about the poor. All of this is part and parcel of the same mindset. When you get into the very fleshly, very worldly, I want what I want now, no deferred gratification, that's where we're at.
And I'm so glad you brought up the aspect of predators, because unless someone begins to think in those terms, when we're addressing these topics, the predators don't want people to realize that there are predators. I've said predators know us better than we know them. And the one thing that predators or cult leaders, one and the same, understand is that the easiest way to manipulate a kid or a young person or anybody really is if you touch their sex and sexuality, you have them for life. Because you've opened up two things, and you spoke to that, Linda. You open up that lust, that energy that becomes very self-absorbing, that crosses boundaries. So you're going after conscience. You're telling people it's really not as bad as it feels. Therefore, meaning if you're the one that's initiating it, you shouldn't feel all that badly. So you dumb conscience down. You give people permission to be selfish, to objectify. And then every cult leader understands that the one thing you have to do to someone is begin to turn down the volume on their intuition. And the one thing they use is always the phrase, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. And you get someone to begin to second guess themselves. Linda, talk about how you see that play out.
Well, what I think you're identifying is the normalization of predatory behavior. We've got the everyday predators out there all the time. And then, of course, they're not all, some are coldly calculating, as you're saying. Some are just doing this naturally because they may have learned it themselves in earlier sexualization when they were young. But it's just it's such a normal part of the pornographic mindset now. Pornography is the fuel behind so much of what's going on. Pornography fuels sex trafficking, child pornography, of course, child assault and molestations. Pornography fuels abortion. Pornography fuels the LGBTQ lusts. We have kids are starting to identify as LGBT or Q at an accelerating rate that's unbelievable. The rapid onset gender dysphoria is one aspect of that, but it's not the only one. There are numerous studies, even the Centers for Disease Control, their youth risk behavior surveys are showing more and more kids. It's galloping along every year. The last time I looked at it, it was about 15% of high schoolers identify as gay, lesbian, or unsure. And 2 years before that, it was 11%. So it's just, the idea that this is very trendy. It's all because it's promotion. It's not because people are born this way. The trans thing is the same way. And I think what's happening with rapid gender onset dysphoria is that there's predatory behavior in the media, in school lessons, in comprehensive sexuality education directed to kids. Predatory behavior, sexualizing and normalizing outrageously high-risk and dangerous and immoral behaviors that will lead kids down terrible roads of heartbreak, of disease, of broken relationships and broken lives that these people really don't care about. They'll be long gone by the time that happens. So this is normalizing this, and it's creating the idea of using and abusing, easily using and abusing people because you're sexualized early before you learn empathetic behavior, before you learn the maturity of commitment. And that's why abstinence until male-female marriage has been recommended so much by conservatives, because it's historically where people are the happiest, the most productive, and where there is the least likelihood of abuse, of violations of any kind, and of raising children in a sane and moral and productive way. It just works better all the way around. So anyway, I've talked all over the place, but one of my concerns is this breaking of boundaries for children in middle schools and letting them open themselves up to all this. Middle school is the place where the LGBTQ and pro-abortion agendas are intensely sold to kids right now, and it's greatly disturbing. It's the reason that I went into this the pro-family movement, to try to awaken people to say, look, you've got to watch your kids during that time frame, because they are being sold this over and over and over in every medium, including school, that's directed to them.
And I want parents to understand that as a clinician, the issue of gender identity disorder, prior to the year 2005, and I've worked with all sorts of kids in all sorts of situations, and in residential treatment, if you're going to hear anything true that kids are dealing with, it'll be in that setting. You never encountered, myself and my colleagues, we never encountered one kid that wrestled with their sexuality. So that's 15 years ago. So I challenge people. I've never had one activist take me up on doing a podcast to talk to me about how this suddenly came about, if it's legitimate.
Exactly. That's why you know that it's not, people are not born this way, because you don't have these spikes when all of a sudden, coincidentally, the culture is embracing it. It's being promoted to kids at a very vulnerable age. And so, like I said to you, and I don't know how much time we have left to talk about this. Okay, well, so here is my theory about rapid onset gender dysphoria. What we see now in so many schools, and especially the more liberal schools that are allowing this, are we see activist teachers and psychologists ready right there for any child that wants to talk to them privately, bypassing parents, about if they've seen one television show that makes them wonder, could I be gay? Could I be transgender? They will start to probe and sell them on it.
Hi there, my name is Jessica Herthel. I'm the co-author of this book. And before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you to the incredible people working in the Livingston and Washtenaw school districts. The work you're doing to spread a message of inclusivity and unconditional love to all of your students, it's commendable, and I hope it serves as an example for the rest of the country to follow. So thanks again. And without further ado, I am Jazz.
I am Jazz. For as long as I can remember, my favorite color has been pink. My second favorite color is silver, and my third favorite color is green.
When I was little, and my mom would say, "You're such a good boy," I would say, "No, Mama, good girl."
At first, my family was confused. They'd always thought of me as a boy.
As I got a little older, I hardly ever played with trucks or tools or superheroes, only princesses and mermaid costumes. My brothers told me this was girl stuff. I kept right on playing.
My sister says I was always talking to her about my girl thoughts and my girl dreams, and how one day I would be a beautiful lady.
Still, I never gave up trying to convince them. Pretending I was a boy felt like telling a lie.
Then, one amazing day, everything changed. Mom and Dad took me to meet a new doctor who asked me lots and lots of questions. Afterward, the doctor spoke to my parents, and I heard the word transgender for the first time.
My mom said that being Jazz would make me different from the other kids at school, but that being different was okay. What's important, she said, is that I'm happy with who I am.
At the same time, the kids are getting in these comprehensive sexuality education lessons, all of this semi-pornographic material that basically teaches kids from 7th and 8th grade, because it starts then, that anal, oral, vaginal sex are all the same. They can all be managed well. Don't worry about it. Everyone does this in all directions for all sexualities and all identities. And by the way, pornography is probably okay. You can use that in your sexual, and sadomasochism. Some of these programs are all sending kids to sites where sadomasochism is sold as well. So what you have is kids that are sexualized, and I think what we're seeing in girls, my opinion, is a reaction to this whole package that I don't want to be a girl. If I'm expected to act like a porn star and go ahead and have these relationships and have boys doing all these, if this is what it takes to please a boy or a man later, I don't want to be a girl and go forward. They're afraid, and they're still little girls as they're developing in 7th and 8th grade. They're little girls, and they have a choice: retreat into childhood, or, hey, I know what I can do. I can be what they would consider sort of asexual. I can be a guy, and that way I avoid the whole thing. And I think for some of the girls that they might not be able to express it, but that is why they adopted this "I want to be a guy" mentality, because they just don't want to go there. It's frightening. It's repulsive. It's the whole adult sexuality is scary to children.
At the time, I was going through a lot of problems with puberty, and I did not want to be there, and I didn't want things to keep happening, Like, it was scary. It was making me have panic attacks all the time.
This is one of the biggest reactions. I bet you could speak to this. When children observe, not participate in, but observe adult sexuality when they're not supposed to be, it's frightening. The emotions are not familiar to them. They can't believe that adults could be that, in their view, out of control. And so they go into a, like, I don't want to go there. I think a lot of girls, it's a self-protective idea. They want to just go be guys.
When I was about 14, my parents and I started to talk to my endo about top surgery. So they referred us to a top surgeon in my state who would work with kids, named Dr. Rast, and he's great. My results, they look awesome. Like, I'm so happy with them. I guess I'll show you guys. This is my chest. I love it. I'm so happy with it.
Now, in and around some of that rapid onset gender dysphoria is probably some sexual abuse and sexualization as well, where they are being told, it's much easier. First of all, many of them start out thinking they're lesbians, and then they think, oh no, I don't want to do that, so I'll just be a guy and I'll have a relationship with a girl. The whole thing is very, very mixed up and confused. But that's just my theory. I don't know if that resonates at all.
It resonates 100%. I think you're exactly right. Abigail Schreier has written a book dealing with, I think she's the one that coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria. There's nothing wrong with that term, and I'm very appreciative that she came up with that term. From my perspective, though, it doesn't address, and so it's not detracting from her work. Her work has done a wonderful job. But I don't think it gets at exactly what you just stated, Linda. And your summary, I would concur 100%, that when you have young people, when you have young girls that are looking at their alternative of, if that's what I have to do, I'm retreating from this, and they are ripe, therefore. So two things set them up for reacting quickly, hence rapid onset. If a girl suddenly wants to become a boy, I appreciate Abigail Schreier calling it rapid onset. This came out of nowhere, so it's rapid. It's come on. Gender dysphoria. But I think how you're describing it and how I describe it, Linda, gets to the heart of it. It is emotional reactivity. It's saying, I don't want a part of this. And what I've said is, and you nailed it, without pornography and predation, you would not have the trans movement for kids. You remove porn from the trans movement, and it dies away back to the numbers that we see in the year 2005. to see a trans kid presupposes they've been groomed and they've been they've been impacted one way or another. So you're looking at a child, exactly as you described it, Linda, at the very least, a child that is reacting to what they've seen, because as they're introduced now, not just in the classroom, but all the more because it's normalized, adults that they trust, the teachers. But what child hasn't seen porn now? And the porn of this day and age, and I'm not familiar with a lot of it, fortunately, is different than Playboy of the 70s and 80s. And so to think that the movie 50 Shades of Grey or that series, it was very interesting when that came out. I was working with sex offenders in the prison system, and I was able to get a lot of feedback from them. And in a nutshell, what they said was this: they can't believe how easy it is now when they get out, too, because the temptation will be that movie has done all the work for them in terms of normalizing, the grooming and normalizing deviance. That in that movie, that guy is doing what guys are serving time for. And now you're showing that to kids, and it's shown, it's in Walmart under entertainment. So and that's mild now. As a matter of fact, when I bring it up to people, especially guys, they say, well, that's not porn, that's entertainment.
Well, and the libraries at schools are full of pornographic novels selling sexuality in every direction and prostitution. And they're vulgar. It's like they're written by pornographers for kids with very innocuous titles, and plus all kinds of other dark and awful things.
This is the book, Stuck in the Middle. It looks like a comic strip on the outside, but when you start flipping through the pages, some of the content would make even a grown-up blush.
It has sexual gestures to what boys are doing with young girls, and I was just completely upset.
This mom says anger not enough to describe how she felt when her 12-year-old son came home with this comic-style book he thought would be funny.
Aunt Cindy, I read this book and I'm sorry, but it's inappropriate. I don't think I should be reading it.
Stuck in the Middle, described by the author as illustrated, honest tales about the agonies of middle school. But the pages inside go into graphic details about sex. And this book is not just in the school library. We called around and found it at public libraries like this one, even in bookstores. Live at 69th and Walker, Patrina Adger, KOCO 5 News.
A Rio Rancho mom says she is incredibly disturbed by a book her son checked out from the high school library. She showed it to us, and it includes images that are sexual, graphic, and not suitable for children. Anchor Royal Day took the mom's complaints to the school district.
All these markers are where I've gone through the book and have found all the different inappropriate scenes.
Katrina Lopez says her son checked out this book, Palomar, from the Rio Rancho High School library on Wednesday. The 14-year-old thought it might be a manga, a Japanese-style comic book. There are cartoon-like characters, but
I started finding child pornography pictures and child abuse pictures, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen in my house.
Online, Palomar is described as a graphic novel written by Gilbert Hernandez. We can't show any of the images because they're too sexual and very graphic.
The books, all of which are part of the series that launched the television show Gossip Girl, were checked out by Hardin's teenage daughter. When Hardin flipped through them,
I was just shocked that this was in the young adult section of the library.
Hardin opposed the book's offensive language and stories of teens having sex with a teacher, teens having sex with a teacher, teens having sex with a teacher, and references to Costco-sized boxes of condoms, as well as the use of illegal drugs.
The covers of these two books look harmless with neon colors and playful emojis, but on the inside, some think it's a completely different story. One you may not want your preteen to read about, with details involving sex, drinking, and stripping.
For kids with very innocuous titles, and plus all kinds of other dark and awful things. And the way if I were a child now, picking up one of those novels and reading this and thinking, this is being pitched to me as normal because it's in the school library. Somebody must have reviewed this it has the imprimatur of the school behind it. Then also they get their CSE, the sex ed in their classes that talks about hookups and, just go to the abortion clinic and it's all no big deal. If I were a child now, it would be like, I want to run away. I don't want any part of this for a period of time. Now, it's a time when I think people, if they develop normally, they leave childhood behind and they want to go on and do their own thing. But we're not giving them, in most cases today, with through public schools, certainly, they don't see an alternative. They're prevented from seeing an alternative most of the time. Praise God, there are still abstinence or sexual risk avoidance sex education programs that are in many of the schools, but not nearly enough. And that's what that's what gives kids hope. I don't have to be this way. Guess what? I am being given permission to not do these things and to make my life less complicated and less disease-ridden, no unwed pregnancies. And, the things that kids really want, that's what most kids really want. They don't want to go down these roads. And it's cruel adults that are sexualizing kids and drawing them in for their own wicked purposes. Truly, they want to justify their own ideology, their own appetites. They want to justify it all and using kids to do so. And it's criminal.
And so as I contend, without porn and without the predators, but without pornography, you have no trans movement. So Linda, speak to what you've been addressing then, just as you spoke to, but even more specifically, what's happening in Ohio, because it's happening in Ohio and other states now, that these predators are capitalizing upon all those influences and they're bringing it into schools and it's being used to brainwash and groom. So speak to the issue of sexual orientation and gender identity sex ed, whatever name it's being called right now. What are you seeing, and what should parents know, and what can parents do about it?
Well, I have the easiest thing is for people to go to the website at missionamerica.com. I have several articles that talk specifically about Ohio, but I've been covering the sex ed issue in a number of other states as well, and I'm part of a national network, the Protect Child Health Coalition, that is trying to address the comprehensive sex education and how dangerous it is. And it's gotten so radical. Most parents, when you start to give them excerpts, they cannot believe it. And in Ohio, for instance, we have a group in Central Ohio that's a counseling group that does, drug and alcoholism counseling for kids, and it partners with schools on all kinds of mental health issues. But they also have a section that is, they have a drop-in club for LGBTQ identified kids after school. No parents needed, no parents really wanted. They don't really publicize that, but that's what most of those groups do. So the people that staff it and volunteer there are of course, above board, with no agendas there.
125 students signed up for the Gay Straight Alliance Group. It is the largest club at Martinsville High School. This is the official Gay Straight Alliance photograph that will go in the school yearbook.
We're such a big club that there's one or two people who are involved in, probably in each classroom.
GSA was conceived with the help of teacher Shay Rafferty. Organizers expect the participation in GSA to increase next year and the number of programs to increase as well. In Martinsville, Derek Thomas, RTV6.
The Indiana Youth Group says there are now 73 gay straight alliances in schools around the state and another 35 GSAs that are trying to get started.
And then they have a counseling, sex ed counseling aspect where they go and visit the schools. And it's called Healthy Bodies, Healthy Futures, but there's nothing healthy. There's no future in this. It's all the pornographication of kids and the resources they give them at the end. I mean, this just gives you a little snapshot of where they're at. Of course, it's Planned Parenthood. Of course, it's all the homosexual groups, but it's also bedsider.org and Scarletine and Sex, etc., all of which are, I think, written by pornography groups. I mean,
to help parents understand what you just said or really emphasize it, in this curriculum, because I've seen it. In this curriculum, there are resource links that the kids are given, and they're also encouraged not to tell their parents about the material. So describe again these links that the kids are going to be directed to.
So at the end, after they've been tutored through all this pleasure education, they go into great detail, all about the condoms, all about, LGBTQ, all about gender. They call boys male-bodied persons, and girls female-bodied persons. When they talk about anatomy, they can't even say males and females. I mean, it's all fables and mythology. But then at the end, they give them bedsider.org. And if you go on there, they talk about the need to probably restrain yourself from group sex during COVID. What middle schooler needs this advice? Come on. And then Scarletine has how to make your own flogging instrument for bondage and sadomasochism, homemade flogging. This is helpful, and they will defend this and say ours is medically accurate. Abstinence education, they are not medically accurate. It's exactly the opposite. We tell them what the absolute historically validated fact that abstinence is the 100% effective way to avoid sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy when you're not married or you don't, pregnancy in a relationship, and abortion, and to avoid all the heartbreak and all the complications. They will not tell, they'll mention that quickly and move on because everything else they do is undermining this. This is dangerous. This is dangerous, high risk, and it has elements of criminality. You're corrupting children. You're sending them down these roads. They also have no problem sending them off to pornography sites as well.
So, Linda, the takeaway from what you've just said is not just for the state of Ohio, but every state, every school district.
Right.
If we're talking to parents, your kids this year, or especially once schools open back up, but it's probably safe to say this year, parents, your kids are going to learn things well beyond what you think they're going to learn in terms of sex and sexuality. They're going to be introduced to deviance, to sexual deviance that you would never permit in your own home. And they're going to be introduced to the concept of binary and non-binary, which means they're already being groomed. Right. And it's going to happen. Best you become prepared now to become very involved in what your kids are going to be listening to and seeing and what's going to be shown to them. Not just in Ohio, but parents all across the U.S. have a tremendous resource in Linda Harvey and her website, missionamerica.com. Parents, there is a wealth of information. It's a repository of key information to help you become aware of what's going on in the culture, how to connect these dots, and what's going on in the schools. Linda, any last words?
Just, do not give up. Keep praying. If you are not a believing person, consider becoming a believer. It's way better on this side, I can tell you. And you won't see it until you actually make that commitment. But trust me, it really is. It really is.
Linda Harvey, thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you for all you do. You're a wonderful, wonderful repository yourself of a lot of great wisdom and knowledge. And so thank you so much.
And thank you for being part of our podcast.
You've been listening to Predator Watch, dedicated to shining the light of truth about the nature of the most sophisticated of sexual predators most likely to target places where victims are most easily accessed. For John Euler and the entire team, thanks for listening.
Predator Watch has been sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. As a non-profit organization, Survivor Support is dependent upon the generosity of people who believe in its mission of supporting survivors. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter of this important work.